You don't usually think of Costco as a political weapon. You think of $1.50 hot dogs, giant packs of toilet paper, free samples on a Saturday. But this week, Costco did something that could hit Donald Trump where it actually hurts. Not in rallies, not in polls. In court, Costco has just filed a federal lawsuit that goes straight at the heart of Trump's emergency tariff machine. The same machine that's been hammering Canada, Mexico, China, and dozens of other countries since February. And if Costco and the other importers win, they might not just get billions in refunds. They could blow a legal hole in the entire system Trump used to slap 35% tariffs on most Canadian goods and 10% on Canadian oil and gas. Tonight on Huge Press Room, we're breaking down what Costco is actually arguing in court, how this ties directly into Trump's Canada tariff war, and the 3 ways this could flip the script for Ottawa or backfire and make things even messier. You're watching Huge Press Room. Hit subscribe if you want more deep dives into Trump versus Canada and the power games hiding behind the headlines. And let's get into it. Let's start with the basics. What did Trump do, and why is Costco suing? On February 1st, 2025, Trump signed a trio of executive orders that did something no president had tried before. He used the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, to impose broad tariffs on imports from Canada, Mexico, China, and others. He declared a national emergency tied to trade imbalances, fentanyl, and migration, and then hit most Canadian goods with tariffs that ultimately went up to 35%. Put a 10% tariff on Canadian oil and gas that didn't qualify under USMCA rules, rolled out similar reciprocal and fentanyl tariffs on a long list of other countries. By September, the U.S. had collected around $88.90 billion under these IEEPA tariffs, and internal estimates suggested a potential $1 trillion liability if courts later ruled them illegal and refunds were owed. Importers weren't just annoyed, they were furious and scared. Because even if the Supreme Court eventually says these tariffs are unlawful, there's a catch. You don't automatically get your money back. You usually need your own case on file to claim a refund. That's why companies like Bumblebee Foods, Kawasaki Motors, Revlon, EssilorLuxottica, Yokohama Tire, and wine importer VOS Selections have already sued. Now Costco has joined them. And because Costco is massive, everybody is paying attention. Here's what Costco actually did. On November 28th, Costco filed a 17-page complaint in the U.S. Court of International Trade. They're suing the U.S. government, the Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, and they're asking for 3 things. A ruling that Trump's emergency tariffs are unlawful, that IEEPA does not give him the power to create or raise tariffs, a full refund of all the duties Costco has paid under those orders, a way to pause the liquidation clock, the process where CBP finalizes past imports, after which those charges are locked in and much harder to recover. Costco says Customs refused to give them more time, and some of their entries could liquidate as early as December 15th, which is why they rush to file now. They don't disclose the exact dollar figure, but remember, Costco did $275 billion in revenue last fiscal year. Roughly 1/3 of its U.S. sales come from imports. About 8% of its sales are tied to goods from China alone. If you slap emergency tariffs on that kind of volume, the bill is huge. Costco's message is simple. If these tariffs are illegal, we're not going to be the sucker that paid and never asked for a refund. Now, where does Canada come into this? Remember, Trump's IEEPA tariffs explicitly cover Canada. 35% on most Canadian goods, 10% on Canadian oil and gas. With USMCA-compliant goods carved out for now, but under constant threat of being pulled back in. So any U.S. retailer that imports Canadian foods, Canadian lumber and paper Canadian auto parts, Canadian consumer goods is paying those duties on top of normal costs. Costco is one of those retailers. Even if its China exposure gets all the headlines, the same legal logic it's using applies directly to Canada tariffs too. Trump is relying on the same emergency powers, the same statute, the same executive orders. If Costco can convince the Court of International Trade, and ultimately the Supreme Court, that IEEPA does not allow presidents to create broad import tariffs, then the China tariffs are in trouble. The Mexico tariffs are in trouble, and the Canada tariffs, the heart of Trump's economic pressure on Ottawa, are in trouble too. That's why this isn't just a corporate fight. It's a proxy battle over Trump's entire Canada strategy. So what's Costco's legal argument? In plain language, they're saying, IEEPA was written to let presidents freeze assets and block transactions in emergencies, not to give them a blank check to invent new tariffs on allies. They point out that 3 lower courts have already ruled that Trump's IEEPA tariffs likely exceed his authority and interfere with Congress's exclusive power over taxation. The key case, Learning Resources versus Trump, is now at the Supreme Court, where justices recently heard arguments and showed real skepticism about the legal basis for these tariffs. Costco isn't trying to relitigate the constitutional theory from scratch. They're doing something more tactical. They want to ride on the outcome of the big Supreme Court case while making sure that, if Trump loses, Costco is first in line to get its money back. They're basically saying, look, we're not here to debate macroeconomics. We're here because if SCOTUS nukes these tariffs, we shouldn't be left holding the bag. Meanwhile, Trump's team argues that the national emergency is real. Fentanyl, illegal migration, trade imbalances. The president needs tools to respond quickly, including tariffs. Courts shouldn't cripple the executive branch in the middle of global economic conflict. And, this is key for Canada, they insist that these tariffs are what gives Washington leverage against uncooperative neighbors like Ottawa. If Costco wins, that leverage weakens. Let's talk about the Supreme Court piece for a second, because Costco's move only makes sense in that larger context. The consolidated case Learning Resources versus Trump v. VOS Selections asks 2 blunt questions. Does IEEPA actually authorize Trump's emergency tariffs? If it does, is IEEPA an unconstitutional delegation of Congress's power to tax and regulate trade? Lower courts have already dropped some bombs. In VOS Selections versus Trump, a 3-judge panel at the Court of International Trade held that Trump's broad Liberation Day tariffs exceeded IEEPA and violated the separation of powers. Another federal judge in D.C. ruled that Trump's use of emergency tariffs looked like an improper tax that only Congress can authorize. The Supreme Court heard arguments on November 5th, and according to multiple reports, several justices, including conservatives, grilled the government lawyer on where the limits are. Questions like, if we accept your theory, what can't a president do under IEEPA? Are we basically saying any trade dispute can be turned into a permanent national emergency? No ruling yet, no clear outcome. But for companies like Costco, the writing on the wall is clear. If this legal tower collapses, we want to be ready. That's why you're seeing this wave of lawsuits. Costco, Bumblebee, Kawasaki, Revlon, state governments, wine importers, all piling into the Court of International Trade. Everyone wants to be in position for refunds if the Supreme Court slaps Trump down. And if that happens, Canada's entire tariff reality could change overnight. So what are the scenarios for Canada if Costco and Coburn succeed? Let's walk through 3. Scenario 1. Tariffs ruled illegal, big refunds, but new chaos. In this version, the Supreme Court says IEEPA does not authorize broad tariffs like Trump's. Costco and other plaintiffs get their refunds. The court leaves open the possibility that Congress could pass a new law giving presidents that power. But they don't have it now. For Canada, that would mean the legal basis for the 35% and 10% IEEPA tariffs is gone. Ottawa can claim a massive political win. We stood firm and the US system checked Trump. Some Canadian exporters might be able to piggyback on US importers' refund claims via contract provisions. But don't get too comfortable. Trump could turn around and demand that Congress legislate new tariff powers, this time explicitly aimed at countries that don't control fentanyl or migration. You'd swap one kind of emergency weapon for another, more permanent one. So yes, Canada would get temporary relief, but the long-term fight would just move from the courts to Capitol Hill. Scenario 2. Court ducks the big question. Costco still wins on timing. In this one, the Supreme Court issues a narrow ruling, maybe saying some specific orders were flawed, but not striking down the whole IEEPA strategy. The big constitutional question gets mostly dodged. However, Costco still wins enough in the Court of International Trade to stop liquidation and secure a path to refunds on technical grounds. For Canada, that's more ambiguous. The tariff tool stays in Trump's hand. But every large importer now has a roadmap. Here's how you litigate and claw back money. That could make the tariffs financially less attractive over time, because every dollar collected might face a legal challenge. In other words, Trump keeps his gun, but more and more people learn how to jam it. That still weakens his leverage over Ottawa. Scenario 3. Trump wins big, tariff supercharged. This is the nightmare outcome for Costco in Canada. If the Supreme Court says yes, IEEPA covers these tariffs and no, it's not an unconstitutional delegation, then Trump walks away with a green light. Emergency tariffs become a validated weapon. Future presidents of both parties can copy-paste Trump's playbook against allies whenever it's politically useful. Courts have essentially said, "We're out. This is political." Costco would probably lose most of its refund claims. Importers would be stuck, and Ottawa would know. The US president now has a Supreme Court-approved tariff hammer he can swing at us anytime he declares an unusual and extraordinary economic threat. That's exactly why Canada is scrambling to diversify exports away from the US, join Europe's safe defense fund, build alternative energy and trade routes to Asia and Europe. Because if Scenario 3 happens, the message is clear. Don't ever let your survival depend on a neighbor who can weaponize emergency powers at will. So is Costco doing Canada a favor here? Indirectly, yes. Costco's lawsuit keeps the legal pressure on Trump's emergency tariff strategy, increases the chances that the Supreme Court sets real limits on IEEPA, shows that even American giants are tired of being jerked around by one administration's emergency declarations. But Costco isn't acting out of love for Canada. It's acting like a business that hates uncertainty. Tariffs that can jump overnight from 0% to 35% or even higher on some goods make planning almost impossible. Costco has actually swapped suppliers, increased local sourcing, expanded its own Kirkland private label to dodge some tariff pain. But there's only so much restructuring you can do. At some point, you go to court and say, "Enough. We need rules, not presidential mood swings." And if those rules end up punching a hole in Trump's Canada tariffs along the way, that's collateral damage Costco can live with. So I'll leave you with this. Do you think it will be politicians or corporations that finally force limits on Trump's emergency tariff powers? Is Costco accidentally becoming one of Canada's strongest allies in this fight? Or is this just a giant retailer looking out for itself, with any benefit to Ottawa being a side effect? And if you were sitting on the Supreme Court, would you really be comfortable giving any president, Trump or otherwise, an open-ended green light to tax allies under emergency powers forever? Let me know what you think in the comments. If you want to see how this Costco story fits into the bigger picture, check out our other videos here on Huge Press Room. Carney's $170 billion revenge. How Canada just plugged into Europe's war fund to dodge US weapons. From best friend to 51st state, how the relationship hit rock bottom. 25% tariffs. Is Trump forcing Canada to choose Asia over America? Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of Trump versus Canada. Thanks for watching Huge Press Room. I'll see you in the next one.